The little black girl told the biker her mom vanished, leaving only a blood trail in their narrow hallway. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a typical Saturday night in the small town of Riverton. The streets were empty, save for a few scattered cars and the occasional pedestrian rushing to get home. The wind howled through the trees, and the faint smell of burning wood lingered in the air as the last traces of daylight disappeared behind the hills. Jack, the leader of the Thunder Riders Motorcycle Club, was at the clubhouse, finishing a drink and preparing to head home. He had just wrapped up a long week of working on bikes and had been looking forward to some quiet time. But then, as he took the last sip of his beer, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but something about the urgency in the tone of the voice on the other end made his heart race. "This is Elena Vargas from Mercy General Hospital in Nebraska. We have a situation," the voice said. Jack felt his stomach drop. He knew the name she mentioned, Maya Jenkins. She was the daughter of his late best friend, Tyrone Jenkins, a man he had promised to protect when he was still alive. Maya had only been a little girl when Jack made that promise over Tyrone's grave. "Is she okay?" Jack asked, his voice tight with concern. The social worker, Elena, hesitated for a moment before replying. "She's stable for now, but Mr. Harland, she's been admitted with injuries consistent with domestic violence. Her stepfather brought her in, claiming she fell down the stairs, but we don't believe it. And she mentioned your name." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had never been able to forget Tyrone's last request, and now that promise weighed on him more than ever. "Don't let anyone take her out of that hospital. You hear me?" He said, his voice firm. He wasn't about to let his best friend's daughter fall through the cracks. "I'm on my way," he added, as he started grabbing his jacket. It was 2:45 a.m., and there was no time to waste. As Jack hung up the phone, he turned to the other members of the Thunder Riders who had gathered around, ready for whatever he had to say. The news was bad, but they were family, and family protected its own. Jack quickly sent a message to the group chat. "Maya needs us. Tyrone's daughter. Domestic situation. We ride out in 20 minutes. Within moments, responses flooded in. "I'm in," came the first message. Then another. "Count me in. I'll be there." The Thunder Riders were a family, and this was not a request, it was a call to arms. As the club members rallied, Jack thought back to that promise he had made years ago. Tyrone had saved his life in the deserts of Afghanistan, taking a bullet meant for Jack. The least he could do now was keep his word and make sure Maya was safe. The riders quickly prepared their bikes, their engines roaring to life as the sound of heavy machines filled the air. Within minutes, they were on the road, heading into the unknown. The trip was long, over 400 miles across the barren plains, through small towns and endless stretches of highway. The wind whipped around them, and the headlights of their motorcycles cut through the darkness like a string of stars. The urgency of their mission weighed on Jack's mind. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the promise he had made all those years ago. His hands gripped the handlebars of his bike tightly as he pushed the throttle harder, his heart racing with every mile. The ride was rough, but they kept going, undeterred by the hours that passed or the fatigue that threatened to slow them down. They weren't just riding to Nebraska, they were riding to save a life. Jack knew this wasn't going to be easy. Her stepfather was a cop, and that made the situation even more dangerous. They would have to be careful. There would be no room for mistakes. They couldn't afford to let the authorities or anyone else get in their way. As the sun began to rise on the horizon, Jack and his crew knew they were close. They had crossed into Nebraska, and they were now just a few miles from the hospital. The tension was palpable as they prepared for the final leg of their journey. Jack felt his muscles tense as he thought about the confrontation that was likely to come. But he wasn't worried about that right now. What mattered was getting Maya out of that hospital and keeping her safe. The Thunder Riders had a reputation for being tough, but more than that, they were loyal. And loyalty meant everything to them. No one was going to take Maya away. Not on their watch. I'll continue from where we left off, as the Thunder Riders roared down the highway towards the hospital. The sky began to lighten with the first light of dawn, but the road ahead seemed endless, stretching out in front of them like a test of endurance. Jack's mind was racing as he thought about Maya, the promise he made to Tyrone, and the danger she was facing now. They had already covered miles of dark, empty roads, and every second felt like an eternity. The sound of their motorcycles was the only thing that broke the silence of the morning, and the feeling of urgency was only growing. The Thunder Riders weren't just riding to Nebraska. They were riding to protect one of their own. They didn't stop. As the sun began to rise fully, they crossed into Nebraska, and Jack could see the hospital in the distance. His grip on the handlebars tightened. He knew the real challenge was about to begin. They couldn't just walk in, guns blazing. Her stepfather, Officer Patrick Donovan, had legal custody of Maya, and he was a cop, which meant they had to be careful. If they weren't, they could end up making everything worse. As they rolled into the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital, the riders spread out, each one parking their bike in a tight formation. Jack's heart was pounding in his chest as he dismounted. His boots hit the pavement with a soft thud, the only sound besides the faint hum of the hospital's air conditioning units. He adjusted his leather jacket, the one with the Thunder Riders patch on the back, and motioned for the others to follow. They were here, but the real test was just beginning. Jack walked through the sliding doors, the cool air inside a sharp contrast to the hot desert sun. His eyes scanned the lobby. The nurses were staring at him as he moved through the space, but Jack kept his eyes straight ahead. He wasn't here for small talk. He was here for Maya. He approached the front desk where a young nurse was typing furiously at a computer. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and her hand hovered over the panic button under the desk. "I'm here to see Maya Jenkins," Jack said calmly, his voice low but firm. "My name is Jack Harland. A social worker named Elena Vargas should be expecting me." The nurse blinked, her face pale, and then looked back at the screen, her fingers moving over the keyboard nervously. "I'll need to verify," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "One moment." Jack stood there in silence, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting. He could feel the tension building in the room, and he knew it was only a matter of time before things got complicated. He was just about to ask the nurse if everything was all right when he saw Elena Vargas walking toward him. She looked just as exhausted as he felt, her eyes tired but focused. She had clearly been working all night, and Jack could tell this wasn't just another case for her. This was personal. "Mr. Harland," Elena said, her voice soft but urgent. "Maya's in room 412. But we need to talk first." Jack nodded, his gaze never leaving her face. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tense. Elena hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder as if checking for anyone who might be listening. "Her stepfather has been here all night. He's insisting that she be released into his custody. But there's something wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't think she's safe with him." Jack's jaw tightened. The situation was worse than he had imagined. Donovan was here, trying to get Maya out, but Jack wasn't going to let that happen. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. "We'll handle it," Jack said, his voice calm but with a dangerous edge. Elena nodded, leading him down the hallway toward room 412. The hospital felt eerily quiet as they walked, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Jack's mind was racing. What had happened to Maya? Why was Donovan insisting on taking her? And why was she so scared? When they reached the door to her room, Elena paused. "I need to warn you," she said quietly, her eyes filled with concern. "She's been through a lot. She might not talk at first, but just be patient with her." Jack nodded again, his hand resting on the door handle. "I'll be careful," he said. As they entered the room, Jack saw Maya lying in the bed, her small frame barely visible under the hospital blanket. She looked so fragile, so young, and Jack felt a pang of anger deep in his chest. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't have had to go through this. But he was here now, and he was going to make sure she was safe. Maya looked up at them, her eyes wide with fear. She froze for a moment before her gaze landed on Jack. Her face softened slightly, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she just clutched the blanket tighter, her small fingers trembling. Jack moved closer, kneeling down beside the bed. "Hey, Maya," he said softly. "It's me, Uncle Jack. You remember me, don't you?" Maya nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't speak, but Jack could see the relief in her face. She was terrified, but she wasn't alone anymore. Not while he was here. The door to the room suddenly opened behind him, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The unmistakable sound of footsteps and the cold air that seemed to follow him told Jack everything he needed to know. Donovan had arrived. I won't let her leave with him. Not while I'm still breathing. The words echoed in Jack's mind as the door to the room creaked open behind him. He didn't need to look to know who had just walked in. The unmistakable click of shoes on the tile floor, followed by the cold, calculated presence of Officer Patrick Donovan, sent a chill down Jack's spine. Donovan, Maya's stepfather, had arrived. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving the doorway as Donovan stepped inside, his uniform crisply pressed and his badge shining under the fluorescent lights. His demeanor was calm, but Jack could see the tension in the way he held himself. This wasn't just a routine visit. There was something about Donovan that felt off, something hidden beneath that controlled exterior. Maya, Donovan's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as he approached the bed. It's time to go home. Maya recoiled slightly, her eyes darting toward Jack, silently pleading for help. Jack's heart clenched at the sight, but he didn't move. He couldn't. He had promised Tyrone, her father, that he would protect her, and he wasn't about to break that promise now. She's not going anywhere with you, Jack said, his voice low but firm. Donovan's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. Excuse me, he asked, his tone rising just a little. She's my daughter. I have legal custody of her. Jack took a step forward, his jaw tightening. She's not going anywhere with you. Not until we know the full truth. Not until I know she's safe. Donovan's eyes hardened, and for a moment, Jack saw a flicker of something darker behind them. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. You don't get to make that call, Donovan said, his voice sharp now. I'm a police officer, and this is my daughter. I'll take her home, and you can stay out of it. Jack's hand twitched at his side. He had to resist the urge to act on the surge of anger that boiled inside him. He couldn't afford to make any rash moves. Not in front of Maya. Not in front of the nurses and hospital staff, who were already eyeing the situation warily. But the weight of the promise he had made to Tyrone, to Maya's father, was too strong to ignore. You're wrong, Donovan, Jack said quietly, his voice cold as ice. She's not going anywhere with you until I know she's safe. I'll stand here all night if I have to. Donovan's eyes narrowed, his face hardening with anger. I don't know what game you're playing, but you better back off. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Jack didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And I know that you're not taking her anywhere until we sort this out. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope, waiting to snap. Maya's eyes were wide with fear. But there was also a flicker of hope in them now. Jack had stepped in, and he wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. Donovan seemed to sense the shift in the room. He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling as he calmed himself. Fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll do this the hard way. Jack didn't move. He didn't have to. This wasn't about winning a fight. This was about protecting Maya, about making sure she was safe and out of harm's reach. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him as she watched, waiting, hoping that he would be able to do what he promised. And he wasn't about to let her down. Elena, Jack said, turning to the social worker who had been standing by quietly, watching the exchange unfold. Call the police. I want a child protection officer here. Now. Elena didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen as she called for backup. Meanwhile, Jack kept his eyes locked on Donovan, not giving him an inch. You're not taking her anywhere, Jack repeated. Donovan stepped back, a dark look on his face. This isn't over, he said, his voice full of menace. You don't know what you're getting into. But Jack didn't respond. He didn't need to. He could see it in Donovan's eyes now, fear. The fear that he might lose everything. Jack's job here was done. He wasn't just standing in the way of a man trying to take a child. He was standing in the way of a system that had failed her, a system that had allowed people like Donovan to do whatever they wanted without consequence. But not anymore. I'll be here, Donovan, Jack said, his voice steady and resolute. And I'll make sure Maya stays safe. Maya finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Jack looked down at her, offering a reassuring smile. You're safe now, kid, he said. We're not going anywhere until we get this right. The room was still tense, the silence between Jack and Officer Donovan thick and heavy. Donovan's face had gone pale with anger, his eyes burning with frustration, but Jack didn't flinch. His gaze was unyielding, the promise to Tyrone echoing in his mind with every passing second. Maya needed him to stand firm, and he wasn't about to break now. Maya's soft voice broke the silence. "Please, don't fight." Her words were quiet, but they carried a weight that Jack couldn't ignore. She was scared, and Jack could see the tears welling up in her eyes. His heart clenched. "We're not fighting," Jack said, his voice calm but resolute. "We're just making sure you're safe. You don't have to worry." Maya nodded, but her fear was still evident in her wide eyes. Jack could tell that the hospital room felt suffocating to her, but there was no turning back now. He had to see this through. Elena stepped forward, phone in hand. "I've called for backup. A child protection officer will be here soon," she said, her voice filled with a sense of urgency. "We need to make sure she's protected from him." Donovan crossed his arms, a sneer forming on his lips. "This is ridiculous. She's my daughter. I'm taking her home," he said, his tone now dripping with contempt. "You have no right to stop me." Jack's eyes never wavered. "I don't care what you say, Donovan," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not taking her anywhere." The door to the room opened again, and Jack's pulse quickened. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their eyes immediately locking on Donovan. One of them, a tall man with short-cropped hair, nodded toward Donovan. "Officer Donovan, we need to speak with you," he said. Donovan's face twisted with irritation, but he didn't argue. He followed the officers out of the room, casting one last glance at Jack and Maya before the door clicked shut behind him. Jack exhaled, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension in the room eased slightly, but it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Maya looked up at him, her small hands clutching the blanket around her. "Is he going to hurt me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack knelt beside her bed, his heart aching for the fear she was carrying. "No," he said firmly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "I'm not going to let him hurt you. I'll make sure you're safe. I promise." She nodded, but Jack could see the uncertainty in her eyes. It wasn't enough. "Not yet. I'm going to stay here with you," Jack continued, his voice warm and reassuring. "You're not alone, Maya. You're with family now." Maya's lips trembled, and Jack could see the relief in her face, though it was still tinged with fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I made a promise to your father, and I'm going to keep it." The door opened again, and this time it was Derek Bonds, the club's lawyer. His presence was like a breath of fresh air in the tense hospital room. "We've got a lawyer on our side now," Derek said with a quick nod. "The paperwork is in motion. We're going to make sure Donovan can't take Maya anywhere." Jack gave a small nod of approval. "Good. Make sure everything's by the book. We don't want to give him any reason to take this to court." Derek smiled grimly. "Already on it. I've got people working on getting the paperwork filed as we speak." Maya's eyes flickered toward Derek, her expression still full of fear. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're going to make sure everything's okay," he said. "You just need to stay strong for a little while longer." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Jack could hear the faint murmur of voices outside the room, the faint hum of hospital machines, but none of it registered in his mind. His thoughts were solely on Maya, on making sure she was safe. He couldn't afford to lose focus. The door opened once again, and Elena stepped inside, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "The child protection officer is here," she said softly. "They're meeting with the police now. It's going to be okay, Jack." Jack stood up, his legs stiff from kneeling at Maya's side for so long. "Let's get this done," he said, his voice unwavering. "We're not letting Donovan take her anywhere." The room seemed to hold its breath as the door opened once again, this time revealing a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a professional yet approachable manner. Her eyes were sharp, her face calm but serious. She was the child protection officer, and she meant business. "I'm Officer Harris," she said, extending her hand to Jack. "I've been briefed on the situation. We're going to take care of everything." Jack shook her hand firmly. "I'm Jack Harland," he said, his voice steady. "I made a promise to Maya's father, and I'm not going to let her go back to him until I know she's safe." Officer Harris nodded. "We're on the same page, Mr. Harland. We'll make sure she stays here, where she's protected." Don't worry. Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't over yet, but they were one step closer to getting Maya the protection she needed. And that was all that mattered. I was still standing in the hospital room with Maya, watching her closely as she looked at me, her small hand gripping the blanket tighter, eyes filled with a mix of fear and relief. We were not out of the woods yet. Her stepfather, Officer Donovan, had been here, and though he was now out of the room, his presence still lingered in the air like a dark cloud. I could hear the faint hum of the hospital's air conditioning, but it felt almost deafening in the quiet. Maya's eyes flickered from Elena to me, her face still pale. Are they really going to take me away? She whispered, her voice trembling. I crouched down beside her, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. No, Maya. We're going to make sure you're safe, I said firmly, my voice steady but with a hint of compassion. You don't have to worry. We're not going to let him take you anywhere. She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. It was clear she didn't fully believe that things were going to be okay. And who could blame her? She had been through so much already. Just a few hours ago, she was at the mercy of her stepfather, and now she was in a hospital room, surrounded by strangers who claimed to want to protect her. It wasn't easy for her to trust, not after everything that had happened. But we were here now, and I wasn't going to leave until she was safe. The door to the room opened again, and I turned to see a man in a suit walk in. He had the look of someone who meant business. He didn't introduce himself, but his presence spoke volumes. Elena stood up, nodding toward him. Mr. Harland, this is Derek Bonds. He's the club's lawyer. He'll make sure everything goes according to the law. I extended my hand to Derek, and he shook it firmly, his eyes calculating but not unfriendly. We've got the paperwork filed, Derek said, his voice low but confident. I've already spoken to the right people, and we're making sure Donovan can't take her anywhere. The judge is going to have to approve any decision. Good, I said, my jaw tightening. We need to make sure Maya stays here, where she's safe. Derek nodded. It's already in motion. The court will be contacted, and we'll get the ball rolling as soon as possible. What about Donovan? I asked, my voice calm but with an edge. He's not going to give up easily. Derek's eyes narrowed, his expression turning serious. I know, but we've got the law on our side, and that's all we need. As the minutes ticked by, I stayed close to Maya, my focus never wavering. I wasn't going to let her out of my sight, not while there was still a threat hanging over her head. We had to move quickly, but we also had to be careful. Donovan might be a cop, but that didn't mean he was above the law. In fact, it made him even more dangerous. He knew how to use the system, how to manipulate it to his advantage. But we had something he didn't. We had each other. We had the Thunder Riders. And most importantly, we had a promise that had been made and would be kept. As the hours wore on, the tension in the room began to build. Maya had fallen asleep, but I couldn't relax. Every creak of the door, every footstep in the hallway, made me jump. I kept my phone close, my finger hovering over the screen, ready to make a call if I needed to. I wasn't going to let anything happen to Maya. Not on my watch. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door opened once again. This time, it was Officer Harris, the child protection officer, and she wasn't alone. She stepped into the room with two other officers, one of them a woman who appeared to be in her late 20s. Officer Harris looked at me, her expression calm but purposeful. We're here to make sure everything goes according to plan, she said. The judge has been notified, and we've filed for an emergency protection order. I exhaled, feeling a weight lift from my chest. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for. Thank you, I said, nodding. We just need to make sure he can't get to her. Officer Harris nodded in understanding. Donovan won't be able to take her. Not now. We're making sure she's protected. I watched as the officers moved quietly around the room, their presence a quiet reassurance. They were professionals, and they were here to do the right thing. But still, there was a part of me that remained on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that Donovan wasn't done yet. There was still a fight to be had, and we were just getting started. As the officers set up their plan and started making calls, I stayed close to Maya, watching her carefully. She had fallen asleep, her breathing soft and even, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I knew she was still scared, still unsure of what would happen next. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be okay, but I couldn't promise her that just yet. We had to wait and see how things played out. The door opened once again, and this time, it was a nurse bringing in a tray of food. Maya stirred in her sleep, but didn't wake up. The nurse placed the tray down on the table next to the bed, then paused, looking at me. "Is she okay?" she asked softly, her voice gentle. I nodded. "She's fine. She's just been through a lot." The nurse gave me a sympathetic look. "She's a brave little girl," she said before turning and walking out of the room. I stood there, watching Maya as she slept, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. There was no going back now. We had made it this far, and we weren't about to stop. Not until Maya was safe, and Donovan was out of the picture for good. I watched Maya as she slept, her small chest rising and falling with every breath, a slight crease in her brow. Even in the calm of sleep, I could see the weight of everything she had been through, everything she was still carrying. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. No child should ever have to go through what she had endured. The room was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of hospital staff moving in and out of the hallways. The officers had set up their plan, but we were still waiting. Waiting for confirmation that Donovan couldn't take her, waiting for the law to do its part. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder in the silence. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for hours now slowly starting to wear off, leaving me feeling exhausted. But there was no time to rest. Not yet. I stood up, stretching my stiff legs. My muscles ached from the long ride and the tension of the past few hours. But it was nothing compared to what Maya had gone through. I walked over to the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the asphalt. The sky was a soft pink, the clouds drifting lazily by. I could hear the sound of motorcycles in the distance, a familiar roar that made my heart skip a beat. The Thunder Riders were close. They had been waiting for me to give the word, and I knew that once they arrived, the situation would escalate. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. We had to be ready for anything. I turned back to Maya, watching her closely. She looked so small in the hospital bed, her thin body almost swallowed up by the sheets. Her eyes were closed, but I could see the faintest tremor in her hands, her small fingers clenching the blanket like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I walked back over to her side, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. I didn't want to wake her, but I needed to reassure her. She had to know she was safe, even if she didn't believe it yet. "Maya," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. "You're safe now," I whispered, my voice low and steady. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We've got this." I stayed there for a few minutes, just watching her, the calm before the storm hanging heavy in the air. The door to the room opened once again, and I turned to see Officer Harris standing in the doorway. Her expression was grim, and I could see the fatigue in her eyes. "Mr. Harland," she said, her voice low but firm. "We've received word that Donovan has called for reinforcements. They're trying to bring in outside help." My stomach tightened. I knew it. Donovan wasn't going to let this go easily. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rising tension. Officer Harris looked at me, her eyes narrowed. "We stay here. We don't give him a reason to escalate things further. We have the legal backing, but we need to play it smart." I nodded, my jaw tight. "I don't want to take any chances with her," I said, my voice low and resolute. "We're not leaving until she's safe." She gave a small nod in agreement before stepping back into the hallway. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the possibilities. What could Donovan be planning? I didn't know, but I knew we had to be prepared. Just then, I heard the familiar sound of motorcycles approaching, the rumble of the engines growing louder with every passing second. I stepped back to the window, looking out at the parking lot. The Thunder Riders had arrived. The sight of their bikes pulling into the lot filled me with a sense of relief, but there was still a lingering unease. This wasn't over yet. I turned back to Maya, who was still sleeping, her face peaceful for the moment. I couldn't let her wake up to a nightmare. She needed to be protected, and I wasn't going to stop until I knew she was safe. The door opened again, this time with more urgency. Derek Bonds, the club's lawyer, stepped inside, his expression tense. "The paperwork is being processed," he said, his voice steady. "We're waiting on the judge's approval, but it should be any minute now." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. We weren't out of the woods yet. Donovan was still out there, and I knew he wouldn't give up without a fight. "Do you think he'll try something?" I asked, my voice low. Derek's gaze was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. I wouldn't put it past him, he said. But we're not backing down. As the minutes dragged on, the tension in the room grew, each second stretching out longer than the last. I could hear the distant voices of the officers talking in the hallway, and I knew that something was about to happen. The door opened again, and this time, it was Officer Harris with a grim expression on her face. "The judge has approved the order," she said, her voice sharp. "Donovan's not going anywhere. We've got her protection." The weight of those words settled in my chest like a heavy stone. Maya was safe. For now. I walked over to the bed, standing over Maya as she stirred in her sleep. "It's over," I whispered, my heart finally beginning to slow. "You're safe." Maya opened her eyes slowly, looking up at me, confusion and fear still clouding her gaze. But then, she smiled, just the slightest curve of her lips, and I knew we had done it. We had kept our promise. I stood by the window, staring out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the city, but inside the hospital room, the air was thick with tension. The last few hours had been a whirlwind, and while Maya was finally safe for now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something still wasn't right. I turned back to Maya, who was sitting up in bed now, a blanket pulled tightly around her. Her eyes, though still clouded with fear, had a glimmer of hope that hadn't been there before. She was no longer trembling, but I could see how exhausted she was, mentally and physically. This poor kid had been through more than anyone should have to endure. But now, she was with us, with the Thunder Riders, and we weren't going to let her face anything alone. The door opened, and Elena stepped inside. She gave me a soft nod before sitting down in the chair by the bed. "The judge granted the protection order," she said quietly. "Donovan can't take her." I let out a slow breath, feeling a small sense of relief. But it didn't last. "What now?" I asked, my voice low, still uncertain of what was to come. Elena paused for a moment, her gaze distant. "Now, we wait for the full investigation to take place. We're not out of the woods yet. Donovan is going to fight this. And we have to be ready for whatever comes next." The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. We weren't out of danger, not by a long shot. Donovan might have been stopped for now, but there was always the possibility that he'd find a way around the system, that he'd manipulate things in his favor. The law wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. I turned to look at Maya, who had been listening quietly. Her wide eyes met mine, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I could see the trust in her eyes, but I could also see the pain. She'd been through so much. It wasn't just about her stepfather anymore. It was about a lifetime of neglect, of fear. Maya had been robbed of so much innocence. I walked over and sat down beside her, not saying a word for a moment. I just wanted her to know I was here, that she wasn't alone. Her eyes flickered to me, and she shifted slightly, as if wanting to say something but unsure if she could. "What happens now?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "You stay here," I said, my voice steady. "You're safe now, Maya. No one is going to hurt you. We'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about him anymore." She nodded slowly, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was trying to trust, trying to believe me, but it was clear she still wasn't sure if it was real. I didn't blame her. After everything she had been through, trust was a hard thing to come by. "We're going to figure out what happened to your mom," I added, my voice soft but firm. "We'll make sure she's okay too. We'll get you both the help you need." Maya's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly, not wanting to show weakness. I understood. I wasn't going to push her. Not yet. Elena stood up, taking a step toward the door. "I'll check in with the officers and see if there's any new information on your mom," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "We're doing everything we can." I nodded, watching her leave the room before turning back to Maya. We had a long road ahead of us. The battle wasn't over. But for now I had to keep my promise. I had to protect her, make sure she felt safe. And I wasn't going to let her down. As the door clicked shut, I sat with Maya for a while longer, the sound of the hospital outside the room fading into the background. All that mattered now was her. All that mattered was making sure she was okay, making sure she had a future that wasn't filled with fear and pain. Hours passed, and the quiet of the room became almost suffocating. But eventually, the door opened again, this time with a knock. It was Derek Bonds, the club's lawyer, standing in the doorway. He didn't need to say anything. His expression told me everything I needed to know. We've got some news, he said, his voice calm but urgent. We're moving forward with the case. We've got the legal backing we need. Donovan won't be able to do anything. My heart sank a little with relief, but I still couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. Not until everything was final. Derek walked into the room, handing me a folder of paperwork. This is just the beginning, he said, looking at Maya, then back at me. But we'll make sure he can't hurt her again. I nodded, glancing at Maya, who was watching Derek with wide, wary eyes. We'll make sure of it, I said, my voice low but full of determination. The Thunder Riders weren't just a group of bikers. We were a family, and no one messed with our family. Derek paused for a moment before continuing, his tone serious. We need to get Maya somewhere safer, though. The protection order is in place, but we can't leave her here indefinitely. We need to get her into a safe home. I nodded again, understanding. We couldn't keep her in a hospital forever. It wasn't a long-term solution. We'll figure that out, I said, my mind already racing with possibilities. For now, let's make sure she's not left alone again. We'll take care of everything. Derek gave a quick nod before heading for the door. I'll keep you updated, he said, before disappearing down the hallway. I turned back to Maya, who was still sitting quietly on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. We'll figure this out, I said softly, more to myself than to her. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. I'm not going anywhere, I added, my voice steady. We're in this together, and no one is taking you from me. Maya gave a small, hesitant smile, but it was enough. For the first time in hours, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. We weren't done yet, but we were getting closer, and that was enough for me. I stood by the window, watching the last traces of daylight fade into the night. It had been a long day, longer than I had ever expected. The battle to keep Maya safe wasn't over, but at least for now, the worst had passed. She was still with us, and Donovan was still on the outside, trying to find a way in. But I knew he wouldn't give up easily. He was relentless, and with his connections, he could make things difficult for us. But the one thing he didn't have was the loyalty of the Thunder Riders. And that made all the difference. Maya was sitting on the bed, her legs pulled up to her chest, her eyes staring at nothing in particular. She had been quiet for the last few hours, probably processing everything that had happened. I could only imagine the whirlwind of emotions running through her young mind. How could she trust that everything was really going to be okay? How could she believe that the life she had known, the fear, the hurt, was finally behind her? I walked over to her and sat down, keeping a careful distance, not wanting to overwhelm her. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something different in her eyes, something soft, something almost hopeful. I offered a small smile. How are you holding up? I asked, my voice gentle, careful not to push too hard. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of the blanket. After a long pause, she spoke. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what's going to happen now. My heart sank. I hated hearing that. I hated that she had to feel that way, after everything she had already been through. But I understood. I was scared too. Scared that Donovan would find a way to take her. Scared that the promise I had made to her father would be broken. Scared that she would end up back in the hands of the person who had hurt her. I know you're scared, I said softly. But you're not alone in this. You don't have to worry about him anymore. We're going to make sure of that. Maya looked at me then, her eyes searching my face for something. Some reassurance, some sign that I was telling the truth. I could see the fear still lingering in her, and I knew that it was going to take time for her to believe that she was safe. How do you know? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. What if he comes back? I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I didn't know for sure. I didn't know what Donovan might try next. But what I did know was that we were prepared to fight for her, no matter what. We've got people, I said, my voice steady. People who won't let him take you. We're not backing down. We'll keep you safe, I promise. She nodded slowly, as if processing my words, but I could see the uncertainty still in her eyes. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be perfect from now on. I wanted to say that the worst was over, but I knew better. We had a long road ahead of us. As if on cue, the door to the room opened, and Elena stepped in, a look of determination on her face. There's been an update, she said, her voice low. The child protection officers have been in contact with the courts. We've got some movement on the case. I stood up, my mind immediately focusing on the new information. What does that mean? I asked. Elena met my gaze, her expression serious. It means we're one step closer. The court has agreed to file for emergency custody. We're waiting for the final order to come through, but it should be soon. My heart lifted a little. It wasn't over yet, but this was a major step forward. We were getting closer to the protection that Maya needed, and that was all that mattered. That's good news, I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Elena nodded. We still need to be cautious, though. Donovan's not going to let this go easily. He'll fight it. But for now, we've got the legal backing we need. What happens next? I asked, my mind already racing with the possibilities. We stay vigilant, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. We make sure Maya's safe, and we wait for the court to finalize everything. Once that's done, we'll move forward. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything settle back on my shoulders. This wasn't over. We weren't out of danger yet, but at least we were making progress. At least we had a plan. As Elena turned to leave, I stayed in the room with Maya, my mind turning over everything she had said. We had the legal system on our side, but the truth was, it wasn't just about the law. It was about protecting Maya, about making sure she had a chance at a life free from fear. The door clicked shut behind Elena, and I turned back to Maya. She was looking out the window now, her face distant. I walked over and sat beside her again, careful not to intrude. You okay? I asked softly. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought she hadn't heard me. But then she nodded, a small, hesitant smile on her face. Yeah, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think so. I smiled back, relieved that she was starting to feel a little more at ease. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We're going to make sure of that, I said firmly. No one's going to hurt you. You're safe now. She looked up at me, the smallest spark of hope in her eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time since we'd arrived at the hospital, I felt a glimmer of hope myself. We were getting closer to the end of this nightmare. And no matter what, I would keep my promise. We would get her through this. I sat in the room with Maya, the soft hum of the hospital machines in the background. The weight of everything we had been through was starting to sink in. We weren't out of the woods yet, but the court order was in motion, and that meant we were finally gaining some ground. Donovan had tried to play his hand, but he had underestimated the power of loyalty, and the Thunder Riders were far from backing down. Maya was still quiet, lost in her thoughts, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of the blanket. I could see the fear still in her eyes, but there was something different now, something I hadn't seen before. There was a hint of hope, a small glimmer that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the parking lot where the motorcycles were parked. The Thunder Riders were keeping a low profile for now, but their presence was always felt. It was reassuring to know that we had their support, that no matter what happened, they would stand by us. The door opened quietly, and Elena stepped inside, her face still tense, but with a glimmer of relief in her eyes. The paperwork is moving forward, she said softly. We're getting the custody order processed. It's just a matter of time now. I nodded, grateful for her calm reassurance. What's next? I asked. Elena glanced at Maya, then back at me. We'll have to make sure she's protected, she said, her voice firm. The judge will issue the order, but we need to be sure Donovan doesn't find another way to take her. I could see the concern in her eyes. This wasn't over. It wouldn't be over until we knew Maya was truly safe. We'll keep her here, I said, my voice steady. We won't let him get to her. Not again. Elena nodded, then turned to leave. As the door closed behind her, I felt a sense of responsibility weigh heavily on my shoulders. Maya's future was in our hands, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. I walked back to the bed and sat beside her, my presence a steadying force. She looked up at me, her face still guarded but not as withdrawn as before. What happens now? She asked, her voice soft. I could see the uncertainty still clouding her eyes. We're going to make sure you're safe, I said, my voice calm but firm. We're getting everything in place, and once the court order is final, you won't have to worry about him anymore. She nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. How could she be? After everything she had been through, trusting someone again wasn't easy. But I knew, deep down, that she wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that things could get better. And that's exactly what I was going to make happen. You're going to be okay, I said, gently placing a hand on hers. We'll figure this out, I promise. You don't have to be scared anymore. For the first time in hours, I saw something shift in her expression, a small, tentative smile. It was so faint, so fragile, but it was enough. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. "You're welcome," I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. I squeezed her hand gently, knowing that the road ahead was still long, but we were making progress. The battle wasn't over, but we were one step closer to securing Maya's safety, and that was all that mattered. Outside, I could hear the sound of more motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. The Thunder Riders were still keeping their distance, but they were here, ready to stand guard, ready to fight if they had to. I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for them. They were more than just bikers. They were family, and they would do whatever it took to protect the people they cared about. I turned back to Maya, watching her as she sat there, her eyes slowly closing as exhaustion began to take over. I wanted her to rest, to finally feel some peace after everything she had been through, but I also knew the weight of what lay ahead. The clock was ticking, and Donovan wouldn't stop until he had what he wanted. But we wouldn't stop either. We had a plan, and we were sticking to it. As the hours passed, I stayed by her side, keeping a careful watch on the door, on the hallway, on everything that moved. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not yet. And then, just as the night was stretching long, the door opened again. This time, it was Officer Harris. Her expression was serious, but there was a small glimmer of something else in her eyes. Hope. "We've got confirmation," she said quietly. "The custody order is going through. Donovan's not going to be able to take her." The weight I had been carrying for the last few hours seemed to lift in an instant. This wasn't over, but we were finally on the right path. Maya was safe. We were safe. For now. Officer Harris gave me a nod before stepping out of the room, leaving us with a few moments of quiet. I sat back down next to Maya, watching as her breathing slowed and her eyelids fluttered closed. She was finally getting the rest she needed. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to relax just a little. We had done it. We had kept our promise. And though there was more to be done, we were on the right track. Donovan wasn't going to win. Not this time. I stood by the window, watching the last of the daylight disappear over the horizon, but I wasn't sure I could relax just yet. The weight of everything that had happened in the last few days still pressed on me, and I could feel my muscles tense with the constant readiness for whatever might come next. Maya was finally asleep, the quiet rise and fall of her chest the only sign that she was resting. But even in her sleep, there was a sense of unease about her, as though she still expected the storm to return at any moment. It was no surprise. She had spent so long living in fear, trusting no one, that even the promise of safety seemed impossible for her to accept. I glanced back at the door, half expecting to see Donovan's face staring back at me, but the hallway outside was empty. The police had stepped in, the court order had been filed, and the protection we'd fought so hard for was finally in place. But that didn't mean Donovan had given up. I knew him well enough by now to understand that he wasn't going to walk away quietly. This fight wasn't over. The door to the room opened quietly, and Elena stepped in, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I could see she had been busy handling the aftermath of everything that had gone down. "Everything's in motion," she said softly, glancing at Maya, who was still curled up in bed. "The judge signed off on the emergency custody order. Donovan's out of options." I nodded, but the relief didn't come as easily as it should have. The feeling that we were being watched, that Donovan could still be lurking in the shadows, never quite left. "What's next?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Elena took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed the question. "Now we have to make sure she's protected. The child protection team is moving in, but we need to make sure Donovan doesn't try to pull something." I felt my jaw tighten. We had the law on our side, but we still had to play this smart. If Donovan was cornered, there was no telling what he might do. Elena moved closer, her voice lowering as if to share something more confidential. "We're looking into getting her placed somewhere safer. A foster family, a temporary home, until we can get everything finalized. We'll do everything by the book, but we're not taking any chances with her." I could feel the pressure of the situation building again. Maya wasn't just a name on a piece of paper. She was a real person, a little girl who had been through too much already, and I couldn't imagine what would happen to her if we didn't keep our promise to protect her. "Whatever happens, we're not letting her go back to him," I said, my voice firm. Elena gave me a small, understanding nod. I'm not suggesting we let her go anywhere until everything's ironclad. I just want to make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. I could see she was still running the scenario through her mind. It wasn't just about the immediate custody order. It was about securing Maya's future, making sure she had a chance to heal. We'll be ready, I replied. There was no other option. I couldn't afford to fail Maya. I couldn't afford to fail Tyrone. The promise I'd made to him when I held his hand on his deathbed wasn't something I could break. We'll handle it, I said, the words heavy with determination. Elena stepped back, her eyes scanning the room. I'll keep in contact with the authorities. If anything changes, I'll let you know. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. And Jack, she added softly, you're doing the right thing. Don't doubt that. I gave her a small nod as she left, the quiet of the room settling in once again. I walked over to the chair beside Maya's bed and sat down. She was still asleep, the soft rhythm of her breathing making me feel like, for the first time in a long while, we were on the brink of something good. But even as I watched her, a small part of me remained on edge. I could hear the faint sound of bikes outside, the hum of engines familiar and comforting. But even with the Thunder Riders watching over us, I knew the fight wasn't over. I wasn't going to let my guard down. Not yet. The door opened again, and this time it was Derek, the club's lawyer. He walked in quietly, his face serious but not without some relief. We've got a line on Donovan's financials, he said, settling into the chair across from me. We're looking into his assets, his connections, everything. If we can find something on him, it could help with the next phase. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. What do you mean by next phase? Derek met my gaze, his expression focused. If Donovan tries to contest the custody, we need a backup plan. We've got legal grounds, but we need more. We need to know what kind of pressure we can apply, especially if he has any connections that could make things difficult. The weight of the situation was pressing in on me again, but I nodded. We couldn't afford to be blindsided. Do what you need to do, I said. I'm not letting him win. Derek gave a short nod before standing up to leave. I'll keep you posted. As the door closed behind him, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out, quickly scanning the screen. It was a message from one of the riders. He's still looking for a way in. I put the phone down, feeling the familiar surge of frustration. Donovan wasn't done yet. But I wasn't done either. Maya's future was in our hands, and I wasn't going to stop until I knew she was truly safe. I walked over to Maya's bed, looking down at her peaceful face. We weren't done yet, but we would be. And when it was all over, Maya would finally have the life she deserved. I stood by the door, listening to the distant sound of motorcycles in the parking lot, the familiar roar of engines now a comfort in the uneasy silence of the hospital room. The door was cracked open just enough to let in the dim light from the hallway. I glanced over at Maya, still curled up in bed, her small body resting, but I knew the weight of everything was still pressing on her young shoulders. She had come so far, but the hardest part was yet to come. I could still see the uncertainty in her eyes, that fear that lingered even after everything we'd done to keep her safe. I wasn't sure when it would go away, but I promised myself I would be there, making sure she never had to face it alone. The door opened a little wider, and Elena stepped in, her face tired but resolute. She had been running the show since the beginning, coordinating everything, from the police to the lawyers, to the safety of Maya and the rest of us. We're getting closer, she said, her voice low, a little worn from the long hours. The court has confirmed that Donovan won't be able to take her. We just need to wait for the final order. I nodded, my heart still racing. And if he tries something? Elena's eyes hardened slightly. Then we fight. We have all the legal backing now, but if it comes down to it, we'll do whatever we need to do to keep her safe. She hesitated before continuing, her voice dropping even lower. We can't let our guard down. Not yet. I looked back at Maya, still lying in the bed, her face soft in the quiet. It was hard to imagine that this little girl had lived in so much fear for so long. The thought of her being back with Donovan, in that environment, made my blood boil. What about his connections? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the question was like a thorn in my side. Donovan was a cop, with a lot of connections, and that made him dangerous in ways that law enforcement couldn't fully protect against. Elena sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. We're looking into it, she said. The club's lawyer is digging into his finances, looking for any weaknesses. But we can't afford to be complacent. No, we can't. I muttered, glancing over at Maya again. She's been through enough. Elena nodded. I know. We all know. But we can't let up. Not until it's all done. There was a long pause, and I could feel the weight of it, the reality of the situation sinking in. This was no longer just about protecting Maya from Donovan. It was about securing her future, about giving her a chance at a life free from fear. Elena stepped back toward the door. I'll keep you posted if there's any new information. Stay here. We're handling everything. I nodded, but before she left, I called out, Elena, thank you for everything. She paused, glancing over her shoulder with a tired but grateful smile. We're family, she said softly before stepping out of the room. I stood there for a moment, the room quiet except for the soft sound of Maya's breathing. The battle wasn't over, but we were making progress. The thought of Donovan trying to take Maya back still made my blood run cold, but for the first time, I felt like we had a real chance of winning. I pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down again, watching Maya. I didn't know if she could feel the weight of what was happening, but I hoped she could find some comfort in knowing that we were doing everything we could for her. And I wasn't going to let her go back to him, not after everything she'd been through. Slowly, Maya's eyes fluttered open, and she blinked at me, her gaze still clouded with confusion. I smiled at her, doing my best to reassure her, even though I didn't have all the answers. Hey, I said softly. How are you feeling? She hesitated for a moment, then whispered, I'm okay. Just tired. I nodded, my voice gentle. You've been through a lot. You need to rest. But you're safe now. We won't let anything happen to you. She nodded, but her eyes still held that hint of fear. I knew it wasn't that simple for her. She had spent too many years living in fear, and it would take time before she truly believed she was safe. But we would get there. I wasn't going to stop until I knew she was okay. You're not alone anymore. I continued, my voice soft. We're all here for you. The Thunder Riders are your family now. Maya's lips twitched into a small, tentative smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I could see it in her eyes, a spark of something, a flicker of hope. It was the first real sign I'd seen that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe in a different future. I sat there for a while longer, just being there for her. There was no need for words. She knew I was staying with her, and that was enough. As the night wore on, the world outside the hospital faded away, and I stayed by Maya's side, ready for whatever came next. We were a long way from being done, but we had already come so far. And I wasn't about to let anything or anyone take that away from us. We would keep fighting, and Maya would have the life she deserved. A life where she was finally safe. I sat in the chair beside Maya's bed, watching as she slept peacefully, her body finally allowing the rest she had been denied for so long. The faint hum of the machines around her was the only sound in the room, but even that seemed like a distant reminder of the world outside. We had made it this far, but I knew there were still battles ahead. Donovan wasn't done, not by a long shot. But for now, we had a moment of peace, and I wasn't going to waste it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I reached for it, my eyes still on Maya. It was a message from Derek, the club's lawyer. Asterisk, we have a hearing scheduled for tomorrow. We're moving forward with the custody petition. Asterisk, my heart skipped a beat. This was it. The legal system was finally starting to take action. Donovan's hold on Maya was slipping. I quickly typed back a reply. Thanks. Keep me posted. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned my attention back to Maya. I couldn't help but wonder what her life would be like now, what kind of future we were building for her. The thought of her being free from Donovan, free to live a life without fear, felt like a dream. But it was a dream I would make come true, no matter what. As I sat there, I began to think back to everything that had led us here. The fight, the long nights, the fear in Maya's eyes when she first spoke to me. The promise I made to Tyrone, her father, had always been my guiding light. He had saved my life, and I was going to make sure his daughter was safe, even if it meant going to war. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time, it was a call from Elena. I quickly answered, my voice low. What's the latest? I asked. Elena's voice was calm but urgent. The court date is confirmed. We'll be going in front of the judge tomorrow morning. We need to be prepared for Donovan's next move. He's not going to give up without a fight. I ran a hand through my hair, frustration building. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but we have the law on our side, right? Elena was quiet for a moment before responding. Yes, but we need to make sure we don't give him any reason to fight back harder. We have to keep everything above board, stay calm, and let the process work for us. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. I'll make sure of that. We'll be ready. Elena's tone softened a little. Jack, we're doing everything we can. Just keep your head on straight. Maya's future depends on it. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of her words. Maya's future. That was all that mattered now. I wasn't going to let Donovan take it from her. I wasn't going to fail her, no matter what. Thanks, Elena, I said quietly. I'll see you tomorrow. After hanging up, I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The sun had set, and the streets were beginning to empty as the night took over. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Donovan was out there, plotting his next move, and I had to be ready for it. The door opened, and I turned to see one of the riders, Hawk, walking in. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his face drawn but determined. How's she doing? Hawk asked, his voice low. She's asleep, I replied. For now, at least. We're good, but there's still a lot to be done. Hawk nodded, taking a seat in the chair beside Maya's bed. We're here, Jack. Whatever happens, we've got your back. We'll make sure she's safe. I gave him a small nod. Hawk was more than just a rider. He was family, and his loyalty meant the world to me. I couldn't have done any of this without the support of the Thunder Riders. Thanks, Hawk, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would do without you guys. Hawk gave a quiet chuckle, but there was no humor in it. Your family, Jack. We protect our own. You don't have to thank us for that. I sat back down, looking at Maya again. She was still asleep, her face peaceful now, but I knew that peace was fragile. We were a long way from being done. Tomorrow's court hearing would be the next step in this fight, and I had no idea what to expect. But whatever came our way, we were ready. We had to be. Hawk stood up, stretching his arms above his head. I'll check in with the others, he said, his voice steady. Make sure everything's ready for tomorrow. Thanks, I replied. I'll be here. Hawk gave me one last look before stepping out of the room, leaving me alone with Maya. The quiet was almost suffocating now. The sound of the machines, the soft rhythm of her breathing. It all felt like a reminder of how fragile everything still was. But as I sat there, watching over her, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her go back to him. We had come too far, fought too hard. Maya's future was in our hands, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. We would get through this. Together. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the weight of everything we had been through seemed to settle on my shoulders like a 1,000-pound burden. Maya had been through so much already, but today was the final step in securing her future, in making sure she was never going back to Donovan. I stood in front of the courthouse, the cold air cutting through my jacket as I waited for the rest of the Thunder Riders to arrive. My heart was pounding, but I kept myself calm, knowing that we had everything in place. We had the law on our side now, and Donovan didn't have a leg to stand on. Maya was safe. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Derek, the club's lawyer. Asterisk, everything's set. We're ready for this. Asterisk, I let out a slow breath. It was now or never. The courthouse doors opened, and Elena stepped out, her face a little more tense than usual. Everything okay? I asked, my voice low. We're still good. She gave a tight nod, her eyes flicking toward the doors behind her. We're good, but we're going to need to be ready for a fight. Donovan's still trying to manipulate the situation. I felt my jaw tighten. Donovan wasn't going to make this easy, and I knew it. But we had something he didn't. A family that would stand by us no matter what. We would keep Maya safe, no matter how hard it got. I turned to see the Thunder Riders pulling into the parking lot. One by one, their bikes roared to life, the familiar sound a comforting reminder that we weren't alone in this fight. They were here, ready to back us up. I felt a rush of gratitude for them, but it was mixed with the simmering anger I still held for everything Donovan had done. Maya was still with us, but the fight for her future wasn't over. Not yet. Let's do this, I said, my voice steady as I started walking toward the courthouse. Elena followed, and we made our way inside. The room was cold, the air heavy with anticipation. I could see the lawyers sitting at the table, flipping through papers, preparing for the battle. But it wasn't just about the papers. This was about Maya's life, her future. She deserved so much more than this fight, but we were going to give it to her. The judge walked in, and everyone stood up, the room growing silent. The next few moments felt like hours. The judge took his seat and called the court to order. "We are here today to determine the custody of Maya Jenkins," the judge said, his voice commanding yet calm. "I've reviewed the case, and I've heard from both parties. Now, I will make my decision." I stood there, my heart racing. Maya's future was hanging in the balance, and there was no turning back. "Your Honor," Donovan began, standing up with his lawyer, "I have legal custody of my stepdaughter, and I have provided for her as best as I could. The allegations against me are baseless, and I believe I am fit to continue caring for her." My blood boiled. I could barely stand hearing him speak, let alone pretend that he was the one who had been protecting her. But I kept my calm. We had to let the law do its job. The judge looked at Donovan with a neutral expression before turning to the table where Elena and Derek were sitting. "And the defense?" the judge asked. Derek stood up, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, we have presented all the evidence necessary to prove that Donovan is unfit to have custody of Maya. He has a history of abusive behavior, and the welfare of the child has been compromised. We request that Maya's custody be granted to her legal guardians, and that she be placed in a safe, secure environment until further notice." The tension in the room was palpable. I watched as Donovan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly knowing that the case wasn't going in their favor. The judge nodded and began taking notes, the silence in the room deafening. Then, finally, he spoke. "After reviewing the evidence, I have made my decision." My heart stopped for a moment. The moment of truth had come. The judge paused, glancing at both parties. "I am granting emergency custody of Maya Jenkins to her guardians, pending further investigation. Donovan's rights to custody are hereby suspended until further notice." The words hit me like a wave. Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the reality that the fight wasn't completely over. Donovan could still appeal, could still try to get his hands on Maya, but for now, she was safe. The courtroom was silent for a moment, and then Elena and Derek exchanged glances, both of them nodding. The judge banged his gavel, officially ending the hearing. "This case is adjourned," he said, and the room began to empty. I walked over to Maya, who had been sitting quietly beside me, her wide eyes taking in everything. I smiled at her, my heart full. "It's over," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now." She looked at me, her face still unsure, but I could see the spark of hope in her eyes. "Really?" she whispered. "Really?" I confirmed, squeezing her hand. "You're going to be okay, Maya. No one's going to hurt you again." She nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders relax. The fight wasn't over, but we had won this battle, and that was all that mattered. As we walked out of the courthouse together, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We still had a long road ahead, but Maya was finally free. She was no longer trapped in the life Donovan had tried to give her, and that was the beginning of her new life, one where she could finally heal and grow. The Thunder Riders were waiting outside, their bikes roaring as they saw us emerge. I couldn't help but smile, knowing that we had done the right thing. Maya was safe. We had kept our promise, and nothing would take that away from us.